When the morning sun shone through the curtains of my bedroom, I was awake. Sleep had become a luxury for me in recent years because of my age. 68 years old is no joke. I rose slowly from the bed where I had once slept with Alfred and went to the window. The garden we had planted together almost 40 years ago stretched beyond the glass. My name is Marilyn Atwood, and I've lived in this house since 1982. Alfred bought it when his company, which manufactured specialized optics for astronomical observatories, began to make a serious profit. I remember the first time he brought me here. I stood there, my mouth hanging open, not believing my eyes. The three-story Victorian mansion with its turrets, conservatory, and three-car garage seemed like a palace from a fairy tale. "It's too much for us, Alfred," I said then. "Nothing is too much for my wife," he replied with the confidence that always made me feel secure. I ran my hand along the oak windowsill. The wood still retained its noble luster despite the years. Like everything in this house, it was of the best quality. Alfred didn't recognize compromise when it came to quality. "Buy the best or don't buy at all," he liked to say. 5 years ago, he passed away. A heart attack took him suddenly, right at his desk in his office on the first floor. I still look in there sometimes, expecting to see him leaning over drawings or financial reports. After his death, our daughter Eleanor and her husband Hubert began to show a strange concern for me. At first, I was touched by their attention. They came every weekend, calling several times a day, offering to help with financial management. "Mom, there's no reason for you to live alone in such a huge house," Eleanor said a month after the funeral. "It's a fortune to maintain it." Hubert, her husband of 15 years, agreed, with that fake smile I'd learned to recognize when he'd first started courting Eleanor. "Think of practicality, Marilyn," he said then. "You could move to a nice apartment downtown, closer to the stores and hospitals." I said no. This house was part of me, part of my history with Alfred. Eleanor had been born here. Our lives had taken place here. All the memories were here. Besides, I was doing just fine on my own. My knees may not be the same at my age, but my head worked perfectly. I gardened, participated in the Saltville Book Club, and occasionally attended exhibitions at the local gallery. Alfred had left me more than enough money. His company was bought by a large conglomerate for an 8-figure sum a few years before his death, and he invested the money wisely. After he was gone, it turned out that most of the assets were titled into a family trust, a legal construct he created on the advice of a lawyer friend to minimize inheritance taxes. I did not go into the details of the arrangement of this trust. Alfred had always handled the finances, and I trusted him completely. All I knew was that the house, accounts, and investments now belonged to this trust, and as a widow, I had the right to use it all for the rest of my life. After Alfred's death, Eleanor and Hubert's visits became less frequent and their conversations more and more tense. They lived in neighboring Ridgemont, only 30 minutes away, but now they didn't come more than once a month. But the calls to help with the sale of the house never stopped. Eleanor had always been a difficult child. Capricious and demanding as a child, she had grown into a woman constantly hungry for more. Alfred spoiled her immensely, and perhaps that was our mistake. She graduated from a prestigious university, but never really worked, taking on temporary projects as a public relations consultant for local politicians. Hubert Penneque came from a wealthy family, but quickly squandered his inheritance on failed investments. He now worked as a financial analyst for a small company and constantly complained that his talents were undervalued. I never fully trusted him. There was something slippery in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at things in our house, as if mentally assessing their value. Their marriage seemed to me a strange union of two people united not so much by love as by common material interests and social ambitions. They had no children. Eleanor always said that children would interfere with her career, though she never built a career. In recent months, I began to notice how their attitudes toward me were changing. Whereas before they had at least pretended to care, now they barely concealed their irritation. Mother, you're wasting our inheritance on gardeners and those stupid paintings, Eleanor said during their last visit, noticing the new watercolor in the living room. It's my money, Eleanor, I replied then, and I will spend it as I see fit. Technically, it's family trust money, Hubert interjected with that smug smile I hated so much. And Eleanor's part of the family, too. They left early that evening, leaving me with an uneasy feeling. Something was brewing, and I couldn't figure out what it was. The answer came unexpectedly, last Tuesday. I was just finishing weeding the rose bushes when I heard Hubert's car pull up, a black Lexus, bought, of course, with the money Alfred gave Eleanor every year for her birthday. They hadn't called ahead, which was unusual. I didn't rush into the house, let them wait. Finished with the last bush, I took off my gardening gloves and slowly made my way to the back door. There were voices coming from behind the half-open window of Alfred's study. They were in the house and didn't even bother to say hello. Dash, 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 legally possible, Hubert was saying to someone on the phone. Yes, Mr. Taylor, I understand the risks, but Clause 17 in the trust documents makes it possible. I froze, listening. Tylo was the lawyer who handled Hubert's affairs, the pompous young man I'd met at Christmas dinner last year. No, she doesn't suspect, Hubert continued. The old woman has no idea of the legalities. Alfred solved everything for her. The old woman. I felt like I'd been burned by that word. Put me through, I heard Eleanor's voice. After a pause, she continued. Mr. Taylor, we want to move quickly. How long before we can organize the auction? 2 weeks? That's great. Yes, we've already found a potential buyer. Kinley is willing to participate and offer the minimum amount. No, Mom can't stop it. She doesn't have that kind of money on hand. Auction? The sale of the house? I froze, gripping the door jamb. Of course, after the sale, we'll take care of her, Eleanor continued as if she were talking about an annoying dog. We'll find a good nursing home. The main thing is to sell this wreck while it's still worth something. A wreck? My house that I've kept in perfect condition all these years? Yes, the property is very valuable, Hubert interjected. Kinley's already talked to the developers. They'll demolish the house, build townhouses, a net profit of at least $5 million. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. They were planning to sell my house to some Kinley guy who'd tear it down for a development, all behind my back, using some loophole in the trust documents. Mom's going to be furious, Eleanor giggled. Can you imagine her face at the auction? Say goodbye to your house, Mom. God, I'm already anticipating it. She won't even realize what's happened, Hubert replied. By the time she does, the house will be sold. By law, we have the right to initiate the sale of trust assets under certain conditions, and we'll create those conditions. I quietly backed away from the window, trying not to give away my presence. Everything inside me was boiling with anger and pain. My own daughter and her husband were planning to kick me out of the house to line their pockets, the house that had been the center of my life for almost 40 years. I quietly walked around the house and entered through the front door, slamming it loudly for them to hear. Eleanor, Hubert, are you in here? I shouted, feigning surprise. A few seconds later, they came out of the office, smiling fake smiles. Hubert quickly tucked the phone into his pocket. Dash, dash, Mom, Eleanor exclaimed, coming over to kiss my cheek. We called, but you didn't pick up. I was in the garden, I answered, trying to make my voice sound normal. What a surprise. You rarely stop by on weekdays. We were driving by and thought we'd stop by, Hubert said, rubbing his hands together. How are you, Marilyn? Fine, I said, staring intently into his eyes. I've never felt better. Something in my gaze made him look away. He'd always been a coward. Would you like some tea? I offered with a smile that hid a growing rage. Or perhaps you're in a hurry. Actually, we have a meeting in an hour, Eleanor said quickly. We just wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm just fine, darling, I replied. Don't worry. They left 15 minutes later, exchanging meaningful glances when they thought I couldn't see. As soon as their car was around the corner, I sank into Alfred's chair in the living room. My hands were shaking, and my mind was reeling with scraps of the conversation I'd overheard. The auction, the sale, a loophole in the paperwork, nursing home. I looked at Alfred's portrait over the fireplace. His confident gaze seemed to be telling me, "Fight, Marilyn. Don't let them take our home." So I decided to fight. Only first I had to find out exactly what they were up to and how they were going to use this .17 Hubert was talking about. And for that, I needed help. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Lloyd, it's Marilyn Atwood. I need your help." Lloyd Nash lived on the outskirts of Saltville in a small but elegant one-story house surrounded by manicured lavender beds. Despite his 73 years, he did his own gardening. That much I knew for sure, because I'd seen him at work several times as I drove by. But I'd never stopped. Until today. Pulling up to his house in my old but reliable Volvo, I sat for a while, gathering my thoughts. We hadn't seen each other in person in almost 10 years, not since he'd retired and stopped attending Alfred's company events. From time to time, I'd gotten a Christmas card from him with a brief description of his life, but nothing more than that. Finally, I made up my mind and pressed the bell. The door opened almost instantly, as if he'd been waiting for me on the doorstep. "Marilyn," he said with a warm smile, but with a look of concern. "Come in." Lloyd hadn't changed much over the years, still tall and straight, though his hair had turned gray and his face had more wrinkles. Always trim in an impeccably pressed shirt and pants with arrows. "Thanks for meeting me on such short notice," I said, walking into the cozy living room, decorated in blue tones. "Your call surprised me," he said, pointing to my chair. I could hear the anxiety in his voice. "What's wrong?" I sank into the chair, feeling a strange mixture of relief and embarrassment. Lloyd had always been perceptive. That's why Alfred had chosen him to be his legal advisor when he founded the company. It's why I've come to see him now. "I need legal advice," I began, "and the advice of an old friend." Lloyd listened intently as I recounted the conversation I'd overheard between Eleanor, Hubert, and their lawyer, about the plans to put the house up for auction, about the mysterious Item 17 in the trust documents, about the nursing home they'd already found for me. Lloyd's face grew darker and darker as I talked. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, tapping his fingers on the arm of his chair. "I'm afraid they might actually do it," he said at last. "I remember that trust." Alfred and I drew it up together. "But how?" I exclaimed. "Didn't Alfred protect me?" Lloyd sighed and stood up, walking over to the bookcase. He pulled out a thick folder of papers and returned to his chair. "Alfred always wanted the best for you and Eleanor," he said, going through the papers. "The trust was set up to protect the family estate from taxes and creditors. You are designated as the primary beneficiary for life, and Eleanor is the secondary beneficiary and heiress upon your death." "Then how can she sell the house?" I asked. "Paragraph 17. Lloyd found the right page and showed me the fine print. It's an asset optimization clause. It allows the trustees of the trust, and Eleanor is one of them along with you, to initiate a sale of assets if it's in the long-term interests of the family. But it's not in my best interests." I took umbrage. "Unfortunately, the wording is rather vague." Lloyd shook his head. It's a typical legal loophole. Alfred insisted on the clause so that he could restructure the assets quickly if the business required it. He never thought Eleanor would use it against you. I felt something cold curl up in my stomach. My own husband had, albeit unintentionally, left a loophole through which our daughter now planned to throw me out of the house. So there was nothing I could do? I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Lloyd looked at me thoughtfully. I didn't say that, he said slowly. You have rights as the primary beneficiary. And there are other possibilities. He set the folder aside and leaned toward me. Tell me, Marilyn, do you have access to money outside the trust? Personal savings that Eleanor has no control over? I smiled, remembering my stash. Yes, Lloyd. Eleanor thinks I'm a naive old woman, but I wasn't born yesterday. I have a private account that no one knows about. After Alfred died, I started saving some of the money the trust paid me every month. Nothing criminal, just a sensible precaution. I'd never fully trusted Hubert, and I could see Eleanor's attitude changing. I'd accumulated a decent amount of money over 5 years. Good, Lloyd nodded. Then I have an idea. If they're going to use the auction to sell your house at an undervalued price to their accomplice, you can outbid them. Buy my own house? I laughed at the absurdity of the idea. Exactly, Lloyd replied seriously. The house is legally owned by a trust, but if you win the auction, it will become your personal property. No trusts, no guardians, no loopholes. Just you and your property. I thought about it. The plan was audacious, but it made sense. However, there remained one significant question. I have about $800,000 in my personal account, I admitted. Would that be enough? Lloyd frowned. That Kinley you were talking about. If they've negotiated a minimum bid with him, they're probably expecting to sell the house well below market value. What's the real value of your house? The last appraisal was around $3 million, I answered. But that was 2 years ago, before real estate prices skyrocketed. I'll check the current prices. Lloyd nodded. But if they plan to start the bidding at the minimum, $800,000 might be enough, especially if they don't expect competition. What if Kinley raises the bids? I asked. Everyone has a limit, Lloyd replied with a sly smile. Even corrupt real estate developers. Besides, I could draw the attention of other potential buyers to this auction. Create competition. The more bidders, the harder it will be to manipulate the process. He fell silent and then looked at me intently. But first, we need to know more about their plans. When and where will the auction be held? Who is this Kinley guy? How far along are they in their preparations? I sighed. I don't know. They're not likely to tell me. Then we'll have to find out by other means, Lloyd said firmly. I still have connections in Saltville legal circles, and I know something about this Tylo guy, a narcissistic upstart who cares more about his reputation than his clients. Lloyd picked up a notepad and started taking notes. 1. We need to confirm whether they've actually set the auction process in motion. 2. Find out the details. Date, location, terms. 3. Find out who Kinley is and what his plans are. I watched Lloyd, feeling hope rising inside. He'd always been like that, methodical, calm, confident. The exact opposite of the temperamental Alfred. Perhaps that was why they complemented each other so well in business. What if we don't make it? I asked. What if the auction happens before we're ready? We'll make it, Lloyd said firmly. It takes time to organize a real estate auction. Announcements, registration of bidders, paperwork. At least 2 weeks, probably more. He put aside his notebook and suddenly took my hand. Marilyn, I have to ask, are you sure you want to fight? It's not going to be easy. Eleanor is your daughter. Are you ready for an open confrontation with her? I felt my heart clench. Eleanor, for all her faults, was my only child. We dreamed of other children, but it hadn't worked out. Maybe it was my fault. I spoiled her too much, letting Alfred indulge her every whim. She's planning to put me in a nursing home, Lloyd, I said quietly. To sell the house where I'd spent my entire life with Alfred and lock me up in some institution. She laughed, imagining my face when I realized I'd lost the house. What kind of mother deserves to be treated like that? Lloyd squeezed my hand tighter. None, he said firmly. Good, we'll fight. Over the next 3 days, Lloyd was very active. He contacted his old colleagues, visited the real estate office, even arranged a chance meeting with Tylo at the cafe where he ate lunch every day. I, meanwhile, was on my usual behavior. I worked in the garden, visited the book club, even went to a local artist's show at the gallery. Anything to avoid arousing Eleanor's suspicions. She called twice, and each time I pretended to know nothing about her plans. On the 4th day, Lloyd invited me to his place with important news. The auction is set for next Friday, he said without preamble as soon as I walked in. 11 o'clock in the morning, in the conference room of the Riverview Hotel. That soon? I gasped. They're in a hurry. Lloyd nodded. Usually these things took longer, but they'd used their connections. The announcement of the trust sale had been published in the minimum time allowed by law, just 10 days before the auction, and in the most inconspicuous section of the Saltville Herald. He handed me the paper, open to the small classifieds page. Among dozens of other reports of bankruptcies and seizures was a small ad for the sale of residential real estate owned by the Atwood Family Trust. They did everything they could to minimize publicity, Lloyd continued. Typical tactics for a scam like this. The fewer potential buyers, the easier it is to manipulate the price. What about Kinley? I asked. Dash Bertram Kinley. Lloyd pulled out a folder of photos and documents. A small real estate developer with big ambitions and not the cleanest of reputations. Sued his clients twice for shoddy construction, once with the city for zoning violations. But he has money and connections. He showed me a picture of a balding man with a smug smile. My sources confirmed that he does plan to demolish the house and build a townhouse complex on the lot. Already filed preliminary paperwork with the planning department. Before the auction, I was indignant. Exactly. Lloyd nodded. He was so sure he'd get the property that he'd already started the approval process for the development. I felt my anger boiling up inside me. They'd already disposed of my house without even waiting for a formal sale. What are we going to do? I asked. I have a plan, Lloyd answered, laying out some papers on the table. I've registered you as a bidder through a front man, my former assistant Perry Winthrop. He's a trustworthy man, and he's agreed to help. So they won't know you're involved until the very last minute. What about the money? I asked. Is $800,000 enough? I did some checking, Lloyd said. They're planning to start the bidding at $500,000, a ridiculous amount for a property like this. Kinley will probably be the only other registered bidder besides Mr. Winthrop, and he'll bid a little higher, about $550,000. And then what? Then you raise your sign and bid. Lloyd smiled. Let's say $700,000. It'll be a shock to them. They don't expect any competition, especially not from you. What if Kinley raises the stakes? Maybe, but he has a limit, Lloyd said. According to my sources, Hubert has promised him the house for $750,000 at the most. If you offer $800,000, he's probably out of the game. I nodded, trying to get this whole plan into my head. And then what? When I win the auction? Then the house will be yours, Lloyd said simply. Legally clean, with no trusts or guardians. You can do whatever you want with it. Live there for the rest of your life. Sell it for full value. Sign it over to anyone you want. He was silent for a moment, then added, The only thing I can't predict is Eleanor and Hubert's reaction. They'll be furious. Let them, I said firmly. They deserve it. Then we'll proceed as planned. Lloyd handed me the documents. You'll need to sign a power of attorney for Perry to represent you at the incorporation. And you'll need to sign an order to transfer the money to a special account that will be used to pay you if you win. I took the pen and signed the papers, feeling strangely calm. All those years after Alfred's death, I had existed in a kind of half-sleep, letting things just happen around me. Now I was taking control of my life again. The next few days passed in tense anticipation. I tried to act normal, but inside everything clenched every time the phone rang. Eleanor called on Wednesday, 2 days before the auction. "Mom, you won't believe this," she began with feigned enthusiasm. "Hubert and I found you a lovely apartment at Sunset Gardens. It's a wonderful place for active retirees. Pool, library, cultural program. We'd like to show it to you this Friday, around 10 a.m. Are you free?" Sunset Gardens is a fancy name for a retirement home on the outskirts of town. They wanted to take me there while the auction was going on. "That's sweet of you, dear," I replied with the same fake warmth. "But I already have plans for Friday, a book club meeting I can't miss." "But, Mom, it's important," Eleanor insisted, and I heard a note of irritation in her voice. "This apartment could be occupied quickly. And your book club is as important to me as your plans, Eleanor," I said firmly. "We're discussing Tony Hanson's new novel. I've already read it and prepared notes. You were always stubborn," she sighed. "Okay, another day then. They won't have another day. After the auction, everything will change." Thursday night I got a call from Lloyd. "It's all set," he said. "Perry's registered as a bidder. The money's in the account. I'll meet you tomorrow at 10:30 at the back entrance of the River View. Eleanor and Hubert will be waiting at the front entrance, so we can avoid a premature meeting." "Thank you, Lloyd," I said, "for everything." "Don't thank me ahead of time," he replied. "Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. Are you ready?" I looked at the picture of Alfred on the bedside table. "What, more than ready?" I said firmly. The morning of the auction was unexpectedly clear after a week of rain. I woke up long before dawn, though I hadn't slept much the night before. The old clock in the kitchen read 5:30 as I made my tea and sat by the window, looking out at the garden, where the first rays of sunlight were already gilding the tops of the trees Alfred and I had planted decades ago. The house was silent in the morning. I walked around it slowly, touching walls, doorways, stopping in front of family photos. Here's Eleanor at 2 years old with a huge teddy bear. Here's our family at the lake, Alfred smiling, hugging us both. Everything seemed so simple then. At 7 o'clock, I went upstairs and had a long time to choose what to wear. I decided on a navy blue suit, which Alfred was particularly fond of. "You look like a queen in it, Marilyn," he said. "I'm going to need that royal confidence tonight." Gathering my hair into a neat bun, I applied a minimum of makeup, but took special care to highlight my lips with bright lipstick, a small symbol of my fighting spirit. Then I took an antique sapphire brooch from the safe in Alfred's office, his 20th wedding anniversary gift, and pinned it to the lapel of my jacket. At 9:30 I was ready. I checked my purse, ID, checkbook, phone, blood pressure pills just in case. As I left the house, I stood still for a moment, as if saying goodbye. "I'll be back," I mentally promised its walls. The Riverview Hotel was located in downtown Saltville, only 15 minutes from my house. Built in the early 20th century, it retained the noble charm of a bygone era, despite numerous renovations. Pulling up to the hotel, I parked on a side street, as we'd agreed with Lloyd, and headed for the back entrance. Lloyd was already waiting for me, dressed in an immaculate gray suit. He lifted his hat at the sight of me, an old-fashioned gesture that somehow touched me to the core. "You look beautiful, Marilyn," he said, and I saw more than friendly approval in his eyes. "Thank you, Lloyd," I said, trying to keep my hands from shaking. "I'm nervous." "That's okay." He touched my elbow soothingly. "But remember, you're doing what you have to do, protecting your home and your life." We went through the service entrance and up the stairs to the second floor, avoiding the main hallway where Eleanor and Hubert might be. "Perry's already there," Lloyd said as we approached the Magnolia conference room where the auction was to be held. "He's going to pretend he doesn't know us. Do you remember the plan?" "Of course," I nodded. We sit quietly, waiting for our turn. When it comes to the bids, I pick up the sign and call the amount. "Exactly," Lloyd squeezed my hand. "I'll be there for you, no matter what happens." We walked into the beige-colored, wood-paneled room. Chairs were arranged in rows in front of a small podium where the auctioneer stood, a thin, middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses. A few people had already taken seats, mostly, I realized, gawkers, attracted by the unusual event in our town, or real estate agents who had come to study the market. Lloyd and I took seats in the last row, where we had a good view of the whole room. Perry Winthrop, whom I recognized from the photograph Lloyd had shown me, sat in the middle, looking bored and indifferent. He was exactly as Lloyd had described him, an unassuming middle-aged man who could easily get lost in the crowd. As the auctioneer laid out the papers, I saw Eleanor and Hubert enter the room, followed by the balding man in the photograph, Bertram Kinley. They looked smug and confident. Eleanor was dressed in an expensive cream suit, almost identical to the one I had given her last Christmas, but which she found too conservative. Hubert, as always, was in his favorite blue blazer with gold buttons, which he thought made him look like a successful financier. They didn't notice me sitting in the back of the auditorium. They had taken seats in the front row and were talking animatedly about something, laughing occasionally. I saw Hubert pat Kinley on the shoulder in a familiar gesture, as if they were old friends. At 10:55, the auctioneer tapped his gavel, calling for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Atwood Family Trust Real Estate Auction," he began in a formal tone. "Today's auction is for a residential property located at 123 Old Mill Road, Saltville, a three-story Victorian-style mansion totaling 650 square feet on a 1 2/10 acre lot." He read out the legal description of the property, the terms of sale, and the rules of the auction. All the while, I watched the back of Eleanor's head, her perfectly styled hair, the way she leaned over to Hubert, whispering something in his ear. "The starting bid is $500,000, the auctioneer announced. "Who's bidding $500,000? Kinley lazily picked up the number one plate. "We have a bid of $500,000 from bidder number one, stated the auctioneer. "Who will offer $550," There was silence in the hall. No one was in a hurry to outbid. Perry, as we had agreed, sat motionless, pretending not to be interested. "500,000 the auctioneer began. "500,000 Eleanor turned to Hubert with a triumphant smile. I saw them exchange a look of smug satisfaction. "Say goodbye to your home, Mother," I heard Eleanor say clearly to Hubert, but loud enough to be heard by those sitting beside her. "I wish she could see her precious palace go for nothing." Hubert laughed, not hiding his gloating. The old woman didn't even realize what had happened, probably going through her old books at the club right now. They laughed, unaware that I was sitting just a few meters away from them, hearing every word. Their taunts felt like they were pushing me back, giving me determination. 500,003. The auctioneer had already raised his gavel. 700,000, I said clearly, rising from my seat and raising my hand high. A surprised whisper ran through the room. Eleanor and Hubert turned around, and I saw their faces change. Shock, disbelief, and then panic. "Mom!" Eleanor exclaimed, jumping up from her seat. "What are you doing here?" The auctioneer, professionally managing his surprise, turned to me. "Madam, are you a registered bidder?" "No," I replied calmly. "But Mr. Winthrop is representing my interests." Perry stood up and confirmed, "Mrs. Atwood is acting on my behalf." I authorized her to place the bids. "All the documents are in order." Hubert, recovering from his shock, rushed to the auctioneer. "This is unacceptable. She can't bid. It's a conflict of interest." The auctioneer, clearly unaccustomed to such scenes, was confused as he fumbled through his papers. "According to the rules, a registered participant can delegate the right to bid if there is a corresponding power of attorney." "Which I have," Lloyd intervened, approaching the podium and holding out the document. "It's all in accordance with state law." Hubert turned red. "This is ridiculous. She's trying to sabotage a legitimate trust sale. I demand that the auction be suspended." "On what grounds?" Lloyd asked calmly. "Mrs. Atwood has the same right to bid in a public auction as any other citizen." As they argued, I noticed Eleanor whispering frantically in Kinley's ear. He frowned, shaking his head, clearly unhappy with the development. The auctioneer, having studied the documents, tapped his gavel. "I accept the bid of $700,000 from the representative of the participant number 2, he announced. "Are there any higher bids?" Kinley hesitated, glancing at Eleanor and Hubert. Their plan was clearly going downhill. "750, he finally said without much enthusiasm. "We have a bid of $750,000 from bidder number 1, the auctioneer announced. "Who will bid 800? I raised my hand again. 800,000. My heart was pounding so hard, I was afraid it would jump out of my chest. It was all my savings, every penny I'd been able to put away over the years. Eleanor looked at me with an expression as if she'd seen a ghost. Hubert was arguing furiously with Kinley, but he shook his head firmly. 800,001. The auctioneer began to count. 800,002. Kinley did not raise the sign. His face showed that he was not ready to go any further. 850, Hubert suddenly shouted, snatching the plaque from Kinley's hands. "I bid 850,000. What are you doing?" Kinley hissed in horror. "That wasn't part of the deal." "Sir, you're not a registered bidder," objected the auctioneer. "Only registered bidders can bid." "I'm bidding on behalf of bidder number 1, Hubert insisted. "We're partners." Kinley snatched his plaque from Hubert's hands. "No, we're not partners, and I'm not going to pay 850 for a house that was promised to me for 750 tops." Eleanor shifted her gaze from Hubert to Kinley and back again in a panic. "Bertram, please," she pleaded. "We can discuss the terms later. The main thing is not to let her win." But Kinley was already packing his briefcase. "I'm sorry, but the deal's off. I don't play games like that." The auctioneer, who was watching this scene with obvious discomfort, tapped his gavel again. So the bid of 800,000 from the representative of bidder number 2 remains the highest bid. 800,000-1, 800,000-2, 800,000-3, sold to bidder number 2 for $800,000. The clang of the gavel sounded like a gunshot. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. The house was saved. It belonged to me now, just me, with no trusts or guardians. Lloyd came over to me and squeezed my hand tightly. "You did it, Marilyn," he said quietly. "Congratulations." I opened my eyes and saw Eleanor standing in front of me. Her face was contorted with rage. Her eyes narrowed to slits. I'd never seen such hatred in my own daughter's eyes before. "How could you?" she hissed. "You ruined all our plans." "Your plans?" I asked calmly. Plans to throw me out of my own house and put me in a nursing home? Plans to sell the house your father and I spent a lifetime building for next to nothing so that some lowlife could tear it down and build townhouses? You don't understand, Hubert interjected, coming toward us. His face was red with anger. This was a chance to optimize the trust's assets, to turn obsolete real estate into liquid assets. Call it what you want, Hubert, I replied, but I've heard it all. Say goodbye to your house, Mom. The old woman didn't even realize what had happened. You think I don't know what you were planning? That I didn't hear your conversation with Taylor? Eleanor turned pale. You eavesdropped? I overheard you discussing my fate, I retorted. I decided to take it into my own hands. But the money, Hubert exclaimed. Where did you get 800,000? You couldn't. Couldn't what? I interrupted. Put it off? Plan? Think. You see, Hubert, unlike you, I know how to handle money, and I've had 5 years to prepare for the day when you and Eleanor try to take everything away from me. Mom, you don't understand. Eleanor suddenly changed tactics, a pleading tone in her voice. We meant well. It's hard for you to keep a house this big on your own. We've found a wonderful place to take care of you. Don't lie to me again, Eleanor. I shook my head. I heard you laughing. I saw your faces. You didn't care about me. You wanted my money and my house. Hubert, realizing that persuasion wasn't working, went on the offensive again. This isn't over, he said threateningly. We have rights as beneficiaries of the trust. We can challenge this sale in court. You can try, Lloyd intervened calmly. But I must warn you that all the documents are in order. The sale was conducted legally, with all the formalities. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to finalize the transaction. He took me under his arm and led me to the table where the auctioneer was already preparing the documents. Eleanor and Hubert remained standing, stunned and confused. As I signed the papers, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them arguing furiously. Finally, Eleanor, after giving me one last devastating glance, grabbed her purse and walked quickly out of the room. Hubert, after a moment's hesitation, followed her. The contract is signed, the auctioneer announced, handing me a copy. Congratulations on your purchase. Thank you, I replied with a smile, although technically I'd just bought my own house. As Lloyd and I walked out of the conference room, I felt the tension of the last few days finally let go. My knees went weak, and I leaned gratefully on his arm. Are you okay? He asked worriedly. Yeah, just a reaction. I can't believe we did this, Lloyd. You did, he corrected me. I was only helping. It was your battle, and you won it. We were slowly making our way down the stairs when I spotted Eleanor and Hubert at the hotel entrance. They were standing by their car, still arguing. At the sight of me, Eleanor abruptly broke off the conversation and headed in my direction. Her face was contorted with anger. You're going to regret this, she blurted, stopping a few feet away from me. You spent all your money, and now you have nothing left. How will you live? Who's going to take care of you when you're too old to take care of yourself? I will take care of myself, Eleanor, I answered calmly. Just as I've done all these years, while you were too busy planning how to get your inheritance, you, she gasped with rage. You selfish old fool! This house was supposed to be our future. Your father built this house for us, I said, feeling my own anger finally breaking through. Not to be torn down for townhouses, and not to be sold for nothing for your profit. Hubert walked over and took Eleanor by the elbow. Let's go, dear. There's nothing more for us to do here. This isn't the end. Eleanor tossed over her shoulder, letting Hubert lead her away. You'll regret this, Mother. I watched them get into the car and drive away, tires squealing on the curve. Lloyd stood beside me, his arm still supporting me. "They're not going to accept it that easily," he warned me. "They'll find other ways." "I know," I sighed, "but I won today, and the house is mine now, completely and unconditionally." Lloyd and I looked at each other, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before: admiration, respect, and something deeper. "I suggest we celebrate," he said, smiling. "I know a great restaurant nearby." I nodded, feeling a warm sense of victory and relief welling up inside me. The worst was over. The house was saved. What happens next we'll figure out. The Olive Branch was a small restaurant just 2 blocks from the Riverview Hotel. It was famous for its Mediterranean cuisine and cozy atmosphere. When Lloyd and I entered, the maitre d' escorted us to a table in the corner by the window that overlooked the town square with its ancient fountain. "To victory," Lloyd said, raising his white wine glass as we ordered. "To new beginnings," I replied, feeling the tension of the last few days slowly let go. We dined leisurely, discussing the events of the auction and plans for the future. Lloyd talked about the legalities of making the house my personal property, how now neither Eleanor nor Hubert would be able to claim it through the trust. "You should rewrite your will," he said, cutting off a piece of lamb. "Now that the house is yours, you can dispose of it as you see fit." I wondered. Despite everything that had happened, Eleanor was still my daughter, my only child. But after today, I couldn't imagine leaving her the house. "I'll think about it," I said evasively, not wanting to cloud our dinner with talk of inheritance. Lloyd nodded understandingly. He always knew when not to push. We were just finishing dessert, a delicious lemon tart that melted in our mouths, when the restaurant door swung open with such force that the bell above it rattled desperately. Eleanor and Hubert stood in the doorway, their faces contorted with rage. They looked quickly around the room, and when they saw us, they rushed to our table. "There you are!" Eleanor exclaimed so loudly that the other customers turned around. "Celebrating your betrayal." I sighed, setting my fork aside. So that's why I'd been feeling anxious all this time, as if I expected our confrontation wasn't over yet. "Eleanor, Hubert," I said calmly, "I see you found us. Why don't you sit down? We can discuss this like civilized people." "Civilized?" Hubert was almost shouting. His usually carefully styled hair was disheveled, and his face was blotchy red. "After what you did? You deceived us. You went behind our backs." "Going behind your back?" I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting to hear that from people who plan to sell my house without saying a word to me." "It wasn't your house. It was trust property," Eleanor objected, plopping down in the empty chair next to me. Hubert followed suit, sitting down across from her. "And we had every right to decide his fate." "As trustees of the trust, perhaps," Lloyd interjected, keeping his professional composure. "But as decent people, as daughter and son-in-law, you were planning to evict Marilyn from her home without her consent." "We found a great place for her," Hubert said stubbornly. "Sunset Gardens is an upscale senior citizen complex." "A retirement complex," I repeated bitterly. "A nursing home, Hubert. Let's call things by their proper names. You were gonna lock me in there while you split the money from the sale of my house." "Mom, you can't do this alone," Eleanor exclaimed, lowering her voice, but not lessening her fervor. "This huge house, a gardener, a housekeeper, electricity and heating bills. You spend money left and right without thinking of the future." "Whose future, Eleanor?" I looked her straight in the eye. Yours? Because I was thinking about mine, and that I want to spend the rest of my life in the house your father and I built together. Don't you get it? This house is our inheritance." Hubert pounded his fist on the table, making the dishes bounce. The only thing of value left after all your spending. And then it hit me. This is it. For years, they had looked at my house not as a place to live, but as an asset to convert into money. They waited, counting every dollar I spent as a deduction from their future wealth. You thought all of Alfred's money should go to you, I said slowly. Every time I bought a new dress or painting, or had the roof repaired, or hired a gardener, you saw it as a waste of your inheritance. Eleanor blushed. Hubert averted his eyes. I've hit the mark. Father left a fortune, Eleanor hissed. And you're spending it like, like, like it belongs to me? I finished it for her. Because it does, Eleanor. Alfred left the money to me, his wife, so that I could live the rest of my life with dignity, not to sit in a chair saving every penny for my daughter. You never thought of us, Hubert exclaimed, about our plans, our future. Have you thought about mine? I parried. When you planned to send me to a nursing home? When you laughed, imagining my face when I realized I'd lost my home? Lloyd put his hand on my shoulder, silently supporting me. I was grateful for that touch. It gave me strength. It's always been like this, I continued, feeling years of resentment and frustration bursting through me. Ever since Alfred was gone, you didn't come to visit me, but to see if I'd spent too much. I hadn't bought something I didn't need. I hadn't given money away to charities. Because you don't know how to handle money, Eleanor exclaimed. Father always said that you had no idea about finances, that without him you would have lost everything. Those words hurt more than I expected. Alfred did say that, not to me, but obviously to Eleanor. He loved me, but he thought I was financially illiterate, and I must admit he was partly right. I was never interested in investments and securities, preferring to be preoccupied with home and family. Maybe you used to be, I said after a pause. But people change, Eleanor. After your father died, I had to learn a lot of things, including how to manage money. Dash, dash, really question mark. Hubert grinned. So you spent all your savings to buy a house that was already yours? A brilliant financial decision. Better than letting you sell it for a third of the price, Lloyd said. Hubert gave him an angry look. Who are you, anyway? Why are you meddling in family affairs? Lloyd is an old friend of mine, I answered in his place, and the only one who really helped me when I found out about your plans. Oh, friend, Eleanor exclaimed with a venomous smile. Or was it more than that? No sooner had my father cooled in his grave, and you'd already found a replacement for him? I felt the blood rush to my face. Even from Eleanor, such a low thing to say was unexpected. Don't you dare say that, I said quietly but firmly. I loved your father every day of our lives together, and I continue to love his memory. Then why did you go against his will? Eleanor persisted. He set up a trust to protect the family assets, and you bought the house, depriving me of my share. I didn't rob you of anything. I shook my head. The house was always intended for me to live in for the rest of my life. Alfred never intended for me to be evicted from it prematurely. But Clause 17. Clause 17 was included to protect against unforeseen circumstances, Lloyd interrupted, not as a tool to defraud the widow of the trust's founder. Hubert snorted. You don't know what Alfred was planning. He always said he wanted to secure Eleanor's future, that everything he was building was for her. And for me, I added quietly, for both of us, not just for Eleanor. But now you have nothing left, Eleanor exclaimed. You've spent all the money on the house. How will you live? Who will pay for your whims now? I sighed. This was the root of their concern. They thought I had spent every last dime and would be dependent on them. I have enough money to live comfortably, Eleanor, I replied calmly. Don't worry about that. But 800,000, Hubert persisted. Where did it come from? Did you sell Alfred's jewelry? Or, his eyes narrowed, had you been hiding the money all this time? Hiding assets from the trust? I've been saving some of the monthly payments I've been receiving from the trust, I answered honestly. Nothing illegal. 5 years, Eleanor exclaimed, doing a quick calculation in her mind. You've been saving that money for 5 years. All that time you didn't trust us. And rightly so, as it turns out, said Lloyd. Eleanor turned to him sharply. And you? Have you been helping her all this time? Inciting her against us? No, Lloyd answered calmly. We haven't spoken to your mother in years. She only came to me after she learned of your plans. You're lying, Hubert practically hissed. This was all planned in advance. You deliberately— Stop it, Hubert. I held up my hand, stopping him. The truth is, I accidentally overheard your conversation with Tylo. I heard you planning to sell my house and send me to Sunset Gardens. I heard you laugh as you pictured my face at the auction. Say goodbye to your home, Mom, were your words, Eleanor. I remembered them exactly. Eleanor turned pale. For the first time in the entire conversation, she looked truly ashamed. Yeah, that's not what I meant, she mumbled. We meant well. Don't lie now, I said tiredly. You wanted money, my money, Alfred's money. You always have. Hubert opened his mouth to object, but Eleanor stopped him with a hand on his wrist. All right, she said after a pause. Yes, we wanted to sell the house. It's worth a lot more than you paid for it, including the land, about $4 million. We could have gotten that money and what? I asked. What would you do with $4 million, Eleanor? She hesitated, glancing at Hubert. We had plans, investments, opportunities. As successful as Hubert's previous projects? I couldn't contain my sarcasm. I recall you'd already lost a lot of money on his ingenious schemes. Hubert jumped up, knocking over his chair. You don't know anything about business, he shouted. Those investments were promising. It's just that the market has changed. Of course, I nodded. It's always the market's fault, never your decisions. The other diners in the restaurant were no longer hiding their interest in our conversation. Some frankly turned in our direction, watching the unfolding drama. You know what? Hubert raked his jacket off the back of his chair. I'm sick of this conversation. Do what you want with your precious home. Live in it alone until you die. Just don't come to us for help when you realize you can't keep it. Don't worry, I replied coldly. I'd rather turn to strangers than to you. Eleanor rose slowly, her face pale and tense. You've always been like this, Mother, she said quietly. Always doing things your own way. Never listened to advice. Even Father said you were too stubborn. Maybe, I agreed. But my stubbornness, as you call it, has helped me keep my home today. And my dignity. We won't bother you anymore, Eleanor hissed. Since you've decided to break the family ties for a piece of real estate. I didn't break those ties, Eleanor. I shook my head. You did it when you decided that your greed was more important than my well-being. She gave me a long look that was a mixture of anger, resentment, and something else, maybe regret. Then she turned abruptly and headed for the exit. Hubert followed her, but turned around at the door. You'll regret this, Marilyn, he said. We'll find a way to get back what is rightfully ours. He walked out, slamming the door loudly. There was an awkward silence in the restaurant. Then conversation gradually resumed, though many customers still cast curious glances in our direction. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of devastation and relief. Are you okay? Lloyd asked quietly, covering my hand with his. I don't know, I answered honestly. I just completely cut off my relationship with my only daughter. How can I be okay? You did what you had to do, he said softly. Protected yourself and your home. But at what cost, Lloyd? I felt tears coming to my eyes. I'd always hoped that one day Eleanor and I would grow closer, that she'd change, grow up, realize. Maybe she will. Lloyd squeezed my hand. Give her time. I shook my head. You saw her face. She'll never forgive me for that betrayal. For her, I've undone everything Alfred has done for her future. Alfred would want you to live a decent life, Lloyd said firmly. He loved you, and he would never let you be evicted from your own home. You know that. I nodded, wiping away an unsolicited tear. I know, it's just, I didn't expect it to go this far, that my own daughter would look at me with such hatred. Greed changes people, Lloyd sighed. I've seen it many times in my law practice. Money and inheritance have destroyed more families than I can count. The waiter approached our table uncertainly. I'm sorry to bother you, but, is everything all right? Can I get you some more wine? I smiled gratefully at him. Yes, please, and the bill when you're ready. When he left, I turned to Lloyd. Do you think they'll try anything? Hubert threatened. Empty threats, Lloyd said firmly. Legally, the house is all yours now. The sale was legitimate. All the paperwork's in order. They can try to challenge it in court, but they have no grounds. What if they press charges? Say I'm out of my mind or that I've been cheated? They'd need evidence for that. Lloyd shook his head. Medical reports, doctor's certificates. And you, Marilyn, are obviously in your right mind. He smiled, and I couldn't help but smile back. Despite the gravity of the situation, I felt safe around Lloyd. It had been a long time since I'd felt that way. The waiter brought the wine and the bill. I reached for my purse, but Lloyd stopped me. Let me, he said. Today is a special day. The day I lost my daughter, I said bitterly. The day you gained your freedom, he corrected gently, and your home. We drank our wine in silence, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. Finally, Lloyd spoke. What do you plan to do next? I wondered. After everything that had happened, the future was hazy. I don't know, I said honestly. Live in my house, take care of the garden. Maybe do something new. Something new? Lloyd asked, interested. I've always loved art, I said, surprised that I was sharing it. Alfred thought it was a waste of time, but I'd been sneaking art lessons. I even have a few pieces hidden in the attic. I'd like to see them, Lloyd said with such sincerity that I couldn't help but believe him. Maybe sometime, I smiled. We walked out of the restaurant into the warm spring evening. The sun was already setting, coloring the buildings of Saltville with golden hues. I'll walk you home, Lloyd said, and it wasn't a question. Thank you, I replied, feeling the fatigue from the emotional day roll in waves. We walked through the streets of Saltville, and I caught glances from passers-by. Of course, news travels fast in a small town. By tomorrow, everyone will know about the scandal at the auction and the restaurant, how Marilyn Atwood bought her own house out from under the noses of her daughter and son-in-law. Strangely, it didn't bother me. After so many years of living with an eye on other people's opinions, first Alfred's, then the judgmental glances of Eleanor and Hubert Yine, finally felt free. Free to make my own decisions, even if they caused gossip. What are you thinking about? Lloyd asked, noticing my thoughtfulness. About how strange things had gotten, I replied. A week ago, I was just a lonely widow who was afraid of hurting her own daughter. And now? And now you're a woman who's asserted her right to live the life she wants, Lloyd finished. And I'm proud of you, Marilyn. His words warmed me more than a warm spring evening. When we reached my car, I turned to him. Thank you, Lloyd, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without your help. You'd be fine, he said confidently. You're stronger than you think. And that's when I realized he was right. I was stronger than I'd ever thought I was, including myself. Stronger and freer than I'd ever been before. The next 2 weeks flew by with the hassle of dealing with the paperwork for the house. I didn't realize that buying a property that was already mine would involve so much paperwork. Lloyd was an invaluable assistant. He knew all the legal intricacies, helped me fill out endless forms, and accompanied me to meetings with notaries and registrars. Mrs. Prentice, a full-figured woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes and impeccably styled gray hair, met us at the city's real estate registry office. She had worked here since time immemorial and seemed to know every house in Saltville and its history. Mrs. Atwood, she said, looking over our papers. This is an unusual case. It's not often people buy their own homes at auction. Um, Unusual circumstances, Dorothy, replied Lloyd, who appeared to know her well. Mrs. Prentice nodded understandingly, not demanding an explanation. I had no doubt, however, that she had heard the whole story news in Saltville spread with the speed of wildfire. In the 2 weeks since the auction, I'd gotten used to the prying eyes at the supermarket and the whispers behind me at the book club. It's all right, she said as she put the last stamp on it. Congratulations, Mrs. Atwood. The house is now officially registered in your name, free of any encumbrances or restrictions. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The house was truly mine, just mine, without trusts, guardians, or point 17. Thank you, I said sincerely. You don't know how much it means to me. Dorothy smiled, and in her eyes I saw the understanding that only a woman who had lived a long life could have. I can imagine, darling. I can imagine. As I walked out of the administration building, I took a deep breath of fresh spring air. It was early May, and Saltville was drenched in apple blossoms and lilacs. How does the landlady feel? Lloyd asked with a smile. Freedom, I answered honestly, and a strange sense of closure, like an important chapter of my life had closed. And a new one opened, he added, offering me his hand. We walked slowly down Saltville's main street, enjoying the warm afternoon. Lloyd and I had grown much closer over the 2 weeks. He stopped by almost every day, helping with paperwork, and sometimes just keeping me company over a cup of tea in the garden. I found myself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness I hadn't felt in years. Aren't you afraid that Eleanor will try to contest the sale? I asked as we passed the city park. Lloyd shook his head. Legally, she has no grounds. The sale had been conducted legally, and all the formalities had been observed. Besides, he mused, I heard that she and Hubert left Saltville. I stopped, startled by the news. Gone? Where? Phoenix, I think. Hubert had gotten some kind of job offer. I wondered. Eleanor always said she hated the heat and would never move south. But I guess the desire to be away from me and the scandal in Saltville had overpowered her. They didn't even say goodbye, I said quietly. Lloyd squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, Marilyn. I shook my head, pushing away the unsolicited tears. You shouldn't be. Our relationship had been broken long before the auction. I just didn't want to admit it. We continued our walk, and the conversation turned to more pleasant topics. Lloyd talked about his plans to expand the rose garden, and I shared ideas for renovating the east wing of the house, which always seemed too dark to me. That evening, Lloyd invited me to dinner, not to a restaurant, but to his home. I accepted, feeling a slight excitement I hadn't experienced since my youth. Lloyd's house was exactly as I had imagined it. Cozy, neat, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and an antique piano in the corner of the living room. Do you play? I asked, running my hand over the polished lid of the instrument. Very mediocre, Lloyd smiled. I got this piano from my mother. She was a great pianist. I didn't know you came from a musical family. There's a lot you don't know about me, Marilyn, he said with a slight sadness in his voice. I realized it was true. Despite the many years we'd known each other, we'd never really been close. Alfred thought Lloyd was an excellent lawyer and business partner, but our families had barely spoken outside of formal events. Dinner was delicious. Lloyd turned out to be an excellent cook. Rosemary steak, baked potatoes, fresh salad, and a bottle of fine red wine created the perfect atmosphere for casual conversation. I didn't know you were such a good cook, I said, savoring the last bite of steak. After Evelyn died, I had to learn, Lloyd replied. It was either cook for yourself or eat convenience foods. I chose the former. Evelyn, Lloyd's wife, had died of cancer more than 10 years ago. I vaguely remembered her, a quiet woman with a soft smile, who always kept in the shadow of her charismatic husband. Do you miss her? I asked. Lloyd hesitated, twirling the stem of his glass in his fingers. I do, he said finally, but not as much as I should. Evelyn and I were good friends, but there was never any real passion between us. That admission surprised me. I always thought they were the perfect couple. Why did you marry her? Lloyd was silent for a long time, as if deciding whether to tell the truth. Because the woman I really loved chose someone else, he finally said, looking me straight in the eye. I froze, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Was he really talking about me? Lloyd, No, let me finish, he interrupted softly. I fell in love with you at first sight, Marilyn. It was in 1979, at a fundraiser at Riverview. You were wearing a blue dress with open shoulders and laughing at someone's joke. I'd never seen anything more beautiful. I remembered that night, the first major charity ball to which Alfred and I had been invited after his success in business. I was young, happy, and in love with my ambitious husband. But I was already married to Alfred, I said quietly. Yes, Lloyd nodded, and you were a perfect match. He was bright, energetic, full of grand ideas. You're the calm, judicious one who gives him balance. I saw the way you looked at each other, and I knew I didn't stand a chance. Why didn't you ever tell me? Lloyd smiled sadly. Why? To ruin your marriage or to embarrass you? I respected your choices and your happiness. Besides, Alfred was my friend and client. I couldn't betray his trust. I looked at Lloyd as if I were seeing him for the first time, this tall, noble man who had secretly loved me for over 40 years. And then you met Evelyn, I said. Yes, he nodded. She was a good woman, knew she wasn't the love of my life, but she accepted it. We lived together for 25 years, and I never once regretted our marriage. We had a quiet happiness based on mutual respect and friendship. But not passion, I finished for him. No, not passion, Lloyd agreed. The one I'd saved for you, though you never knew it. We sat in silence, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. I didn't know what to say. This revelation had changed my whole view of the past, of the years when I had thought of Lloyd as Alfred's business partner. I don't expect anything in return, Marilyn, he said at last. I didn't tell you this to pressure or manipulate you. It's just, after everything that's happened, I thought it was time for the truth. I reached across the table and covered his palm with mine. Thank you for your honesty, Lloyd, and for being there for me when I needed help. I'll always be there for you if you let me, he replied simply. I came home that night with a heavy heart. Lloyd walked me to the door but didn't go in, sensing that I needed time to process his confession. The house greeted me with its familiar silence. I walked into the living room and stopped in front of Alfred's portrait. He was looking at me with his confident gaze, as if he knew everything that had happened. What would you say, Alfred? I asked quietly, looking at his image. What would you think about all this? Of course, the portrait was silent, but I knew my husband well enough to imagine his reaction. He was a pragmatist and valued loyalty above all else. Lloyd had always been a loyal friend and trusted advisor. Alfred respected him. As for Eleanor, Alfred adored his daughter, but he was not blind to her faults. He often said that she was too spoiled and selfish. Perhaps he even foresaw that one day her greed might take over the family bond. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes, remembering our marriage. Alfred and I were happy in our own way. He was a great husband, caring, generous, devoted. But was there the deep understanding between us, the quiet harmony I felt around Lloyd? The next morning, I woke up with a clear head and a firm decision. I would no longer live in the past. The house is mine, and I will use it as I see fit. And as for Lloyd, well, perhaps fate has given us a second chance. I went down to the kitchen and made myself some tea. Sitting by the window, I watched the gardener, the elderly Mr. Greenwood, trimming the hedges. The sight of it always calmed me. The telephone rang. It was Barbara Croft, the chairman of our book club. "Marilyn, darling," she said. "Did you hear? Eleanor and Hubert have left town, sold their house to the Nortons, and left for parts unknown." "To Phoenix," I answered calmly. "They moved to Phoenix." "Oh." Barbara seemed disappointed that she couldn't tell me the sensational news first. "So, you knew? I found out yesterday." "And how are you, okay?" There was genuine concern in her voice. "Yes, Barbara," I said. "I'm perfectly fine." After talking to Barbara, I decided it was time to act. The first thing I did was call Lloyd. "Would you like to come over tonight?" I asked him. "There was something I wanted to show you." He arrived an hour later, as elegant as ever, but with a slight uncertainty in his gaze. I met him in the hall and took him straight upstairs to the attic. "Marilyn, what's going on?" he asked as we climbed the narrow staircase. "You said you wanted to see my paintings," I said. "Here, look." The attic was large and bright, thanks to the large skylights. It was where I kept everything that didn't fit into Alfred's careful design of the main rooms, including my artistic experiments. Lloyd walked slowly around the attic, scrutinizing each painting. There weren't many, about 20 of them, painted in oil and acrylic on canvases of varying sizes, mostly landscapes and still lifes, but there were a few abstract compositions as well. "Marilyn, they're beautiful," he said sincerely, stopping in front of a small painting of a sunrise over a lake. "You have a real talent." "Thank you." I felt myself blush at his praise. Alfred thought it was a waste of time. He said serious people didn't do such foolish things. Lloyd shook his head. There was a lot he didn't understand about art. These works, there's something special about them. Not just technique, but a real feeling. I approached him, inspired by his words. "I'm thinking of turning the east wing of the house into an art gallery." "An art gallery," I said. "Not just for my own work, but for local artists. There are so many talented people in Saltville who have nowhere to exhibit." Lloyd turned to me, and his eyes shone. "That's a wonderful idea, Marilyn. You could organize exhibitions, workshops, creative evenings." "Exactly." I felt a wave of enthusiasm wash over me. The house is too big for one person. Why not make the most of it? We went downstairs to the living room, where I had sketched out plans for the east wing on the table. Lloyd scrutinized them, asking questions and suggesting ideas. His enthusiasm was contagious. "Do you really think it's possible?" I asked when we had finished discussing it. "Not just possible, it's a great idea," he said confidently. The house would get a new lease on life, and Saltville would get the cultural center it had been missing. We were sitting side by side on the couch, and I suddenly realized how close he was. His hand was right next to mine, and all I had to do was move it lightly to touch it. Lloyd, I said quietly, about what you told me yesterday. He tensed, but didn't move away. I didn't mean to embarrass you, Marilyn. If you want, we can forget about this conversation. No, I shook my head. I don't want to forget. On the contrary, I've been thinking about it all night. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I loved Alfred very much. Our marriage was a happy one, despite all its faults. But now he's gone, and I'm alone with a house that's too big for me and a daughter who betrayed me for money. Lloyd listened attentively without interrupting. You came to my rescue when I needed it most, I continued. You were there for me, supporting me, believing in me. And I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. I finally worked up the courage to take his hand. I don't know what to make of this, Lloyd. I'm not young, and I haven't had many relationships in my life, but I'd like to, give it a shot, if you still want to. Lloyd looked at me with an expression like he couldn't believe his ears. Then he slowly brought my hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I've waited for 40 years for this, Marilyn, he said softly. Of course I want to. In that moment, I felt the weight of the past finally let go of me. Yes, I had lost my daughter. Yes, our family had been destroyed by greed and betrayal. But I found a new freedom, the freedom to be myself, to follow my desires, to build a new life. I want to show you something else, I said, getting up from the couch and holding out my hand to Lloyd. Let's go to the garden. The peonies that Alfred and I had planted the first year we bought the house were in full bloom. We stepped out onto the terrace into the midday sun. The garden was magnificent, a riot of color and fragrance, carefully planned, yet not lacking in natural vibrancy. Every year I think it's a miracle, I said, leading Lloyd to a bed of lush pink peonies. These flowers have survived so many winters, so much hardship, but every spring they come back, more beautiful than ever. Lloyd put his arm around my shoulders, and I let myself snuggle against him. Like you, Marilyn, he said softly, like you. The year flew by. The east wing of my house had been transformed beyond recognition. The walls, once covered with heavy portraits of Alfred's ancestors, now shone with fresh paint and were the backdrop for paintings by local artists. Of the 5 rooms in this wing, 3 became exhibition halls, 1 became a small studio for master classes, and the 5th became my personal studio, where I spent most of my time. The Atwood Gallery opened in June, at the height of Saltville's tourist season. I was nervous before the opening ceremony, but Lloyd was there for me, supporting me through everything. He stood at the entrance, greeting guests as if he'd been an art gallery curator all his life, not a successful lawyer. This is amazing, Marilyn, Barbara Croft exclaimed as she looked through the first exhibit of county landscapes. Who knew we had so much talent in Saltville? I smiled as I watched visitors move from one painting to the next, animatedly discussing what they were seeing. Among the exhibits were 3 of my works, modestly signed with the initials M.A. and not in the most prominent place. Your paintings are the most interesting, Lloyd whispered, coming up behind me and putting his arm around my waist. Don't exaggerate. I shook my head in embarrassment, but I was secretly flattered. Not at all, he replied seriously. See that gentleman over there in the gray suit? That's Edward Harrington, who owns a gallery in Richmond. He's already asked twice if your work is for sale. I glanced at the tall, gray-haired man who was scrutinizing my fall landscape. I don't think I'm ready to sell my paintings, I said. It's too personal. Lloyd nodded understandingly. That's what I told him, but he left his card and told me to tell you that he'd love to see your work on display in his gallery if you ever change your mind. The entire evening was filled with congratulations, rave reviews, and even a few offers to buy the works on display. Young artist Emily Chase, whose watercolors of local landmarks I particularly highlighted, sold 3 paintings and was commissioned for a fourth. Mrs. Atwood, I don't know how to thank you, she said, her eyes shining with happiness. I never thought anyone would like my work enough to buy it. You have real talent, Emily, I said sincerely. I'm just glad I could help others see it. By the end of the evening, when the last of the guests had left, Lloyd and I were alone in the main exhibit hall. I felt pleasantly tired and deeply satisfied. Are you satisfied? Lloyd asked, putting his arm around my shoulders. More than satisfied, I snuggled into him. I never thought I'd be starting a new business at my age. I never expected it to be so successful. You underestimate yourself, Marilyn, he smiled. I always have. In the months that followed, the gallery became the cultural center of Saltville. I organized new exhibitions every 2 weeks, held workshops for children and adults, and organized creative evenings. The house that once seemed too big and empty to me was now filled with life and creativity. In the fall, when the maple leaves in the garden turned red and gold, Lloyd invited me to a special dinner at his home. He was unusually solemn and a little nervous, which amused me. We'd become so close over the past year that we were usually completely comfortable with each other. I have a suggestion, he said, as we moved from the main course to dessert, his signature apple cinnamon pie. I'm listening, I smiled, intrigued by his serious tone. Lloyd pulled an envelope out of his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between us. What is it? I asked, hesitant to open it. Tickets, he replied. To Italy, 2 weeks in Tuscany, starting in Florence, museums, galleries, vineyards, small medieval towns. I thought you'd like it. I stared at the envelope, not believing my ears. I'd only been to Europe twice in my life, and both times with Alfred on business for his company. We'd stayed in expensive hotels, attended business dinners, and I'd had little time for museums and sights. Lloyd, I couldn't find the words. It's beautiful, but the gallery. Emily can handle it, he said softly. She's already practically working as your assistant. 2 weeks isn't that long. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were indeed 2 tickets to Florence with an open return date. An open date? I wondered. Lloyd blushed slightly. I thought we might want to stay longer, or maybe go somewhere else. Paris, Madrid, Athens. You're offering me a big trip? I couldn't help smiling. I'm offering you an adventure, he replied seriously. To both of us. We've lived by other people's rules long enough, Marilyn. It's time to live for ourselves. I stared at this amazing man who had come into my life, seemingly so late in life, but had brought so much light and joy. How could I say no? Yes, I said simply. I'll go to Italy with you. And perhaps not only there. His face lit up with such a happy smile that I felt my heart skip a beat. We were scheduled to fly out in a month, in mid-October. I was fully immersed in preparations, updating my closet, studying Italy travel guides, making lists of must-see museums and galleries. Emily was thrilled to be able to run the gallery in my absence and literally bombarded me with ideas for new exhibitions. A week before we left, as I was sorting my things for the trip, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting company and was surprised to see Eleanor and Hubert on the doorstep. They looked different from what I remembered, tanned from the Arizona sun, wearing expensive but inappropriate clothes for Saltville. Eleanor was stiff, and Hubert smiled strainedly. Mother, Eleanor began, may I come in? I stepped back silently, letting them into the house. We walked into the living room where I motioned for them to sit down. Tea? Coffee? I asked politely, though my insides clenched with a bad feeling. No, thank you. Eleanor shook her head. We won't be long. We just, wanted to see you. I sat down across from them, my hands folded in my lap. It's been almost a year since you left. You haven't called, you haven't written, and suddenly you decided to see each other. Hubert cleared his throat. Marilyn, we realize there's been a misunderstanding between us. A misunderstanding? I raised an eyebrow. You tried to sell my house out from under me and put me in a nursing home. Is that what you call a misunderstanding? Eleanor threw her husband an annoyed look. Mother, we came to apologize, she said with obvious effort. What we did, it was wrong. We've realized our mistake. I looked at my daughter carefully, trying to see sincerity in her eyes. But all I saw was calculation and some nervousness. What happened, Eleanor? I asked her bluntly. Why did you suddenly decide to apologize after a year of silence? They looked at each other, and Hubert nodded slightly as if giving permission. We're in trouble, Eleanor finally admitted. Hubert's business in Phoenix didn't work out. We've lost almost all of our savings. That's it. Money, always money. And you came back to me, I said slowly, when you needed financial help again. That's not the only reason, Eleanor exclaimed with feigned indignation. We really missed you. And Saltville. Phoenix wasn't such an attractive place to live. What do you want me to do? I asked bluntly. Hubert fidgeted in his chair. We thought maybe you could, help us get back on our feet. Temporarily, of course, until we can find a new job and a place to live. And we also heard about your gallery, Eleanor added. Barbara Croft wrote me that you've been very successful. I could help you with the organization, with advertising. I have experience in PR. You know, I looked at them and all I felt was tiredness. No anger, no resentment, just tired of this endless game in which they saw me only as a source of money. No, I said calmly. No to what? Eleanor blinked incomprehensibly. No, I won't give you money. No, you will not work in my gallery. And no, we will not reestablish relations just because you want something from me again. Eleanor's face contorted with anger. You can't do this to us. I am your daughter. Yes, you are, I agreed. And that's the only reason you're still sitting in my living room instead of standing outside the door. But daughter or not, I'm not going to let you manipulate me again. Hubert stood up, his face turning purple. This is all because of him, isn't it? Because of that Lloyd? He's turned you against us. Lloyd had nothing to do with it. I stood up too, feeling the irritation building in me. You ruined our relationship when you decided that my house and my money were more important than my well-being. So you're choosing him over your own daughter? Eleanor stood up as well, her voice shaking with rage. Your lover over your family? I choose respect, Eleanor, I replied firmly. Respect for myself and my decisions. Lloyd respects me, which is more than I can say for you. You're going to regret this, Hubert hissed. When you're alone, when you need help. I have friends, I interrupted him. Real friends who aren't there for the money, and I have Lloyd. Fine, Eleanor hissed, grabbing her purse. If you chose your precious Lloyd and your stupid gallery over your own daughter, then goodbye. Don't come to me later when he leaves you for someone younger. I almost laughed at the absurdity of the words. Lloyd has waited for me for 40 years, Eleanor. I don't think he'll suddenly change his mind. They left with a loud slam of the door, and I went back into the living room, feeling strangely relieved. It was as if the last thread that bound me to the past had finally been severed. That evening, I told Lloyd about Eleanor and Hubert's visit. We sat on the terrace, watching the sun set over the horizon. You don't regret it? He asked, looking at me carefully. She is your daughter, after all. I wondered, looking up at the golden sky. Do I regret refusing to give them the money? Number, do I regret ruining our relationship? Yes, of course, But I can't change Eleanor. She's always been like that. She thinks the world should revolve around her. Alfred only made it worse by his endless indulgence. Lloyd took my hand. Maybe someday she'll realize that she's lost something more valuable than money. Maybe, I agreed, though I didn't really believe it. But I can't live waiting for that moment. I have my own life, and I want to enjoy it. With you, with the gallery, with new friends. And with Italy, Lloyd smiled. And with Italy, I confirmed, feeling the anticipation of the trip displace the sadness of breaking up with my daughter. The next day, I called my lawyer, not Lloyd, but a young woman named Samantha Reed, who had handled my affairs after Lloyd and I had become more than just friends. I want to change my will, I said when we met in her office. Samantha listened carefully to my wishes while making notes. Are you sure you want to exclude your daughter completely? She asked when I had finished. Legally, she can contest the will if she feels unfairly disadvantaged. I'm not excluding her completely. I shook my head. I'm leaving her a sufficient amount so she can't say I've forgotten about her. But the bulk of my estate, including the house and all assets, must go to the foundation. The foundation was my new idea, a charitable organization to support elderly people in difficult situations. Those who, unlike me, did not have the means to protect themselves from greedy relatives or unscrupulous guardians. The foundation will be called New Chapter, I continued. It would provide legal assistance, financial support, and social support to seniors who had experienced injustice or abuse at the hands of their loved ones. Samantha nodded, continuing to take notes. And your house? The house will be the headquarters of the foundation, I said confidently. It will host counseling, workshops, support groups, and the gallery will continue to operate, and part of the income will also go to the foundation. You've thought of everything carefully, Samantha said respectfully. May I ask what inspired you to create such a foundation? I smiled, remembering my own experience, my own story, and the realization that not everyone in my position has a friend willing to come to the rescue or the means to protect themselves. 3 days later, the new will was ready. I signed it in front of a notary and 2 witnesses, feeling like I was doing something really important. For the first time in my life, I was disposing of my estate completely of my own accord, without looking at my husband's expectations or my daughter's needs. Our trip to Italy exceeded all expectations. Florence enchanted us with its museums and architecture. The small towns of Tuscany, with their authentic atmosphere and amazing cuisine. We walked the narrow streets of Siena, tasted wine in Montalcino, admired frescoes in Arezzo, and everywhere I drew, quick sketches of squares and streets, detailed sketches of sculptures and architectural details, watercolor studies of landscapes. Lloyd waited patiently while I worked, sometimes sitting next to a book, sometimes talking to locals in his not-so-confident Italian. On our last night in Florence, sitting on a hotel terrace overlooking the Arno River, Lloyd pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Marilyn, he began, and I saw a mixture of excitement and determination in his eyes. I know we're not both young, that we have whole lives behind us, lived with other people, but these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. He opened the box that held a simple but elegant ring with a small sapphire. I'm not asking you to change your last name or your life. I just want to be there for you, officially in front of the world. Will you marry me? I looked at the ring, at his face, at the lights of Florence reflected in the river, and felt happiness overwhelm me. At 69, I had received a marriage proposal from the man who had loved me all my life. Who would have thought it? Yes, I replied simply, extending my hand to him. It was my pleasure. We returned to Saltville, engaged to be married, and the news of our engagement became the main topic of discussion in town. Barbara Croft was thrilled and immediately offered herself as wedding planner. Lloyd and I decided that the ceremony should be modest, just close friends, without too much pomp. On the day of the wedding, standing next to Lloyd in Saltville's city garden, I thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought me to this moment. The loss of Alfred, Eleanor's betrayal, the struggle for the house, all of it, had finally opened the door to a new happiness I had never even dreamed of. Eleanor didn't come to the wedding, even though I'd sent her an invitation. I wasn't particularly surprised. Her pride wouldn't allow her to accept my choice. But somewhere deep inside, there was hope that one day she would understand. After the ceremony, we had a reception at now Lloyd's and my house. The gallery was open to guests, and many people got their first look at my new exhibition, a series of Italian landscapes painted while traveling. "They are beautiful, Marilyn," said Edward Harrington, who had traveled from Richmond for our wedding, especially the one overlooking the Arno. "There's something special about it." "Thank you," I smiled. It was a special moment. In the evening, when the guests had gone, Lloyd and I sat in the garden watching the first stars light up. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Nash?" he asked, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "About how strange things have gotten," I said, looking up at the starry sky. "A year ago, I thought my life was basically over, that I'd lost my daughter, that I'd live out my days alone, defending the house from her encroachments. And now? And now I have you." I turned to him. "A gallery, new friends, plans for the future, a foundation that I hope will help a lot of people, a whole new life I never expected." Lloyd kissed me gently. "We have many years ahead of us, Marilyn, and I intend to make each one of them special." I snuggled into him, feeling like I'd finally found my place in the world, not as Alfred's wife, not as Eleanor's mother, but as myself, Marilyn Atwood Nash, artist, gallerist, founder of a charitable foundation. The house I had fought so desperately for was now serving not only me, but so many other people. New ideas, new projects, new works of art were born within its walls. It became exactly what I had always wanted it to be, a place of life, creativity, and support. A month after we were married, Lloyd and I officially registered the New Chapter Foundation. At the opening ceremony, I gave a speech that ended with the words, "It's never too late to start a new chapter of your life. It's never too late to fulfill a dream, to find love, to help others. Age is just a number, not a sentence." And I hope that our foundation will help many elderly people to understand this and find the strength to fight for their happiness, as I once found this strength in myself. That evening, signing the documents on the transfer of part of my property to the foundation, I thought about the fact that my path to this moment was not easy, but I had no regrets. Every loss, every disappointment, every struggle had eventually gotten me to where I needed to be. And home, my beautiful old home, continued to live its life, now filled not only with my memories, but with the hopes and dreams of so many others.